I don't forgive betrayal. Not on Easter and not under my roof. I didn't know I'd say out loud before the day was done, but the words were already sitting on my tongue like a nail waiting for a hammer. Morning came up over the cottonwoods in a pale yoke of light. I'd spent it like I always do, polishing my wife's blue pie dish, laying her recipe cards beside the mixer, and propping the long table on the veranda with a shim I whittled from mesquite. 60 years and change has taught me to make wobbly things steady. The dyed eggs dried in rows on the railing, reds, blues, a stubborn green that looked like a pear bruise on one side. I'd stamped a tiny brand into the shell wax of 3, AP inside a horseshoe, a grandpa's joke, a promise I'd watch where little hands reached. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. They came in a caravan of dust and laughter. Oscar first, in a denim jacket that pretended not to be expensive, Zena's sunglasses reflecting the pasture like a mirrored lie. Whitney's SUV trailed with Nolan at the wheel, jaw tight, always too careful with gears he didn't pay for. Valeria bolted from her seatbelt and hit my ribs with a hug. Miles shyly showed me a plastic Dino he said could smell gold. Uma, all elbows in sunlight, asked if the eggs were ready. I told them the hunt would start when the wind shifted, and not a second earlier. Let them think I consult the weather like an oracle. Truth is, I like to hear the ranch listen back before we stomp all over it. There are a dozen small jobs on a holiday. Tighten the porch chain so the swing won't squeal when someone and their secret sit in it. Check the barn latch. Heat the oven to the mark my wife drew in pencil inside the door when the dial lost its truth. If the paint ever fades, she told me before the cancer took her, you'll still remember the smell. I do. Yeast and cinnamon and quiet bravery. Dad, this place looks good, Oscar said, choosing a safe word and parking in the middle like a decoy. Zena kissed the air near my cheek. Whitney rearranged hydrangeas I'd already arranged. Nolan counted plates like an auditor. I said nothing and kept the rhythm of the kitchen going. A leader doesn't fill silences. He lets others spend themselves inside them. Okay. I clapped once. Hunters, line up. I gave each grandkid a woven basket, the old kind that splinters just enough to remind you it was alive. I slipped Uma a wink and, for no reason I can explain, pressed my thumb against that tiny wax-branded egg as if I could hold time and place. They scattered into the orchard, small shouts hopping between trees. I followed slower, boots tasting last week's rain in the soil. The ranch speaks in details. Hawks wheeling high, a windmill turning like a thoughtful clock, fence wires singing when cattle rub it. I noted a new scuff on the barn door, a fresh padlock on the tool chest Oscar bought me at Christmas. He gives gifts that lock. Grandpa! Miles yelled. Treasure. He stood near the rosemary hedge, both arms around something egg-shaped but not egg. A plastic container, opaque white, with a seam and a latch. Not mine. Let me see that, partner. I knelt, knees complaining like honest friends. The container had that cheap store shine, a kind you don't get farm supply. Valeria traced the latch with a painted fingernail. Is it part of the game? She asked. Whitney's voice floated over, careful sweet. Probably Daddy's, sweetie. Daddy's. Whose? Oscar's eyes were on me, not the kids. Nolan hovered, hands in pockets, measuring distances. Zena lifted her phone like a tourist in someone else's story. I weighed the container. Light but not empty. My thumb found a crack in the plastic, like a healed cut. The seam had grit in it, ranch dust, not stored dust. It had been here long enough to belong and short enough to lie. Grandpa, open it. Uma bounced. I should have told a joke, let the moment pass like a cloud. Instead, I heard my wife in the quiet behind my ribs. Don't flinch. Present, you can't unhear truth. You can only outstand it. I clicked the latch. Inside lay a neat stack of paper, rubber-banded, edges sharp as a new blade. The first page stared up at the county seal and block letters. Copy. Legal description of property. Preston R. Hale Ranch. Parcels ID. Beneath it, my name, my boundary lines, and a signature that looked like mine if my hand had forgotten me. I have never seen these papers. The sun stopped being warm. The rosemary grew a bitter edge. I felt the old part of me, fence builder, calf puller, hail watcher, stand up inside. 60 is old enough to know when a storm is patterned, not random. I lifted the stack and a corner flashed. A separate sheet, photocopied, agreement to transfer and polite treachery. Zena moved closer, perfume edging into my air. Oscar said lightly, "Huh, would you look at that?" I looked at him. "Is it another clue?" Valeria asked, bouncing on her toes. "No," I said, my voice steady as the windmill. "It's the map of a stranger's intentions." Whitney reached for the papers. I didn't give them up. My thumb pressed against a fake signature, and the wax of that branded egg in my pocket softened like a warning. Somewhere a bell rope moved in the church tower a mile off, or maybe it was only my memory tugging. The ranch went very quiet, as if it, too, were waiting for me to speak. "I have never seen these papers," I repeated, each word a post-driven plum. Oscar smiled without teeth. "Dad, let's not make a thing out of—" From the bottom of the container, something else slid free, another folded document, heavier stock, the kind lawyers love. The title line was bold enough to knock. Power of Attorney, Preston R. Hale, and below it, a date stamped last month. The paper stayed heavy in my hand long after the kids had darted off to chase the next pastel shell. They didn't understand what they'd found. They weren't supposed to. Childhood is a brief kingdom where betrayal doesn't exist, and I wasn't about to break its gates for them. Not yet. I slid the Power of Attorney sheet back into the container, folded the lid, and pressed it shut until the latch snapped. My thumb lingered on the seam as if heat might burn truth away. But it didn't. It never does. The wax-marked egg in my pocket pressed harder against my leg, a reminder that innocence and deceit had been hidden in the same soil. "Dad," Oscar called, tone bright as tin. "Why don't you come inside? Dinner's ready to serve." He waved me forward with glass already in his hand. Zena fussed with napkins, Nolan ferried platters. Whitney lined up wine bottles as if a pageant depended on it. The long veranda table stretched like a stage waiting for its script. I followed. Each board groaned under my boots like they were warning me of weight ahead. The family filled their chairs with the efficiency of a cast hitting marks. Kids giggled, passing roles before grace. Oscar rose with practiced timing, holding his glass higher than the others. He cleared his throat, eyes shining with something rehearsed. "A toast," he said. Zena smiled too quickly. Nolan coughed into his napkin. Whitney's face arranged itself into polite encouragement. I waited. "To Father," Oscar said, his voice carrying across the dishes, "for building this home, for raising us strong, and for the new life this land is about to bring." The words rang out like a mallet striking brass. New life, this land, about to bring. My grip tightened around my fork until metal squealed against porcelain. The grandkids clapped, innocent applause echoing treason. "Yes," Zena chimed, raising her glass. "To the future, to opportunities." Whitney's eyes darted toward me, then away. Nolan muttered, "To investors," under his breath, but not quietly enough. Investors. The papers in my jacket pocket seemed to pulse with each syllable. I forced my lips into a smile that felt carved from oak. "A generous toast," I said. "May the ground beneath us remain steady enough to hold it." Glasses clinked. Wine spilled. Valeria laughed, not catching the fault lines opening beneath her. I lifted my own glass and let the rim touch my lip, but didn't drink. The old farmhand in me counted faces the way one counts fence posts. Measure the distance, note the weak ones, mark where repair will be needed. Oscar sat back down with a victorious tilt to his jaw. Zena brushed his sleeve like he'd won a ribbon. Nolan exhaled. Whitney whispered something to Uma, who was busy stacking deviled eggs into a crooked tower. The food came and went, but the taste was ash. The words of the toast hung over the table, a banner only I seemed to see. Later, as the sun slipped lower and the dishes clattered back to silence, Uma toddled up with a wicker basket nearly too heavy for her arms. "From Mommy and Daddy," she said, cheeks flushed. Inside the basket lay bright eggs and one folded sheet, creased into the shape of surrender. The note read, Papa, it's time to step aside. The house is too big for you alone. I stared until the letters blurred. My hand crushed the wicker, splinters biting skin. They had written me out of my own story, and they'd chosen Easter, the day my wife once called a season of hope, to deliver the execution. I set the basket down slow, like placing flowers on a grave. The sky darkened over the ranch. Somewhere in the distance, the barn doors creaked though no wind moved. And in that creak, I heard voices, low, urgent, male, coming from the direction of the barn. The night had its own way of listening. Out here, sound travels farther than trust. Crickets stitched the dark together, but beneath their rhythm I caught something else. Muffled voices, too low to be playful, too sharp to be casual. The barn. I left the veranda light burning and stepped into the yard. Boots sank into soil still damp from last week's rain. My hand brushed the porch rail, then let go. Better not to carry any comfort where I was heading. The barn loomed like a confession, waiting to be pried open. Its roof caught a shred of moonlight, tin glowing faint, as if ashamed of what it sheltered. I moved slow, each step remembering the years I'd hammered those planks myself. When you build something with your own sweat, you know how it breathes. You also know how to listen for what doesn't belong. Near the sidewall, I crouched low, through a slit between boards. The yellow of a lantern leaked out, jittery like a guilty pulse. Tear it down first thing, a voice said. Oscars, clear as Sunday bells. Sentiment won't pay dividends, Nolan answered, his tone brisk, oily. Investors want clean ground. They don't buy memories. Another voice chimed in, unfamiliar, carrying the clipped vowels of city money. Our plan requires demolition before permits lapse. You promise signatures. Without them, the schedule fails. Oscar again, firmer now. You'll have them. My father's too tired to fight. By next month, the land will be yours. My jaw set. Tired? I pressed my shoulder against the cold wood, listening harder. Nolan shuffled papers. I could hear the slap of them against a hay bale. We've drafted contingencies. The old man doesn't need to know until escrow. The shell company takes ownership. We cash out. Everyone wins. Everyone. Except me. Except the ranch. Except the memory of my wife standing barefoot in the same barn doorway 30 years ago, flowers still on her arms, laughing at calves tangled in rope. I steadied my breath. Rage at 60 is different from rage at 30. It doesn't burn fast. It burns long. The lantern light shifted. Shadows stretched across the boards. I caught sight of Oscar's profile, my son, but wearing a stranger's hunger. He laughed softly, as if the deal was already sealed. One of the men said, when the house is down, we'll clear the orchard too. Subdivide lots. Easter Ridge Estates has a ring to it, doesn't it? Easter Ridge. My land named like a billboard. My hand clenched around nothing, wishing for rope, for hammer, for any tool to cut through this treachery. But wisdom said, not now. A man doesn't win wars by charging in barehanded. He wins by listening until the enemy believes the night is theirs. I eased back, spine against the rough siding. Every word I'd heard carved itself into me, not as pain but as proof. The barn door creaked. I stilled. Voices softened. Boots scraped the floor. Someone laughed again, then the lantern dimmed. When silence settled, I slipped away through the orchard, back toward the house. The moon watched like a witness, unwilling to intervene. Inside, the grandkids slept curled in quilts, faces peaceful, unscarred by betrayal. I stood in the doorway, guarding them like a soldier off duty, but never disarmed. On the mantel above the cold fireplace sat the old family Bible, its leather-worn, corners softened by decades of prayers. I had opened it countless times, but tonight my hands felt drawn as if the book itself remembered more than I did. I pulled it down, pages sighing as they parted. Halfway through, a slip of paper fell into my lap. My wife's handwriting. It read, if they ever try to take it, hide what you must, but never surrender. This land is your cross and your strength. I closed my eyes. Her voice, steady as spring rain, came alive again in me. When I opened them, The Bible lay heavy with more than scripture. It carried command. And I knew the war had begun. I didn't sleep. Men who build fences know the value of staying up through storms, watching the posts hold against wind. Betrayal is worse than weather. It moves in silence, cuts from within. I sat at the kitchen table with the Bible open, my wife's note folded neat beside the lamplight. Her words beat in my chest. Never surrender. The house was quiet, but quiet is not the same as safe. By morning, I knew I couldn't stay blind. Oscar's papers weren't just shadows in the barn. They had weight. They had signatures. They had a trail. And trails always end at the courthouse or the church. Around here, faith and law walk hand in hand. So I drove to town. The old Ford rattled on the gravel road, coughing smoke like a tired mule, but it carried me the way it always had, steady and stubborn. I passed the church first, its steeple cutting the pale sky. The bell rope swayed gently even without a breeze, as if some unseen hand tested it. My chest tightened, but the courthouse called louder. Inside, the air smelled of dust and ink. Records lived here, thicker than trees, harder than stone. I knew the clerk behind the desk, Miss Talbot. Her father once bought hay for me in lean years. Her eyes widened when she saw me, then narrowed with something like pity. "What can I do for you, Mr. Hale?" she asked. I placed both hands on the counter. "Tell me if anyone's filed papers on my land." Her fingers fluttered uncertain, then moved across the keyboard. The screen's glow reflected in her glasses. She hesitated. That hesitation was enough to make my stomach clench. She turned the monitor slightly, as though sharing a secret. "There's a petition. Filed last week. Application for sale of agricultural parcels, accompanied by a power of attorney." She clicked again, and my own name lit up the header like a verdict. "See here?" She pointed. "Signed by you." But I hadn't signed anything. I leaned closer. The signature was a mockery, a crooked echo of my own hand. I had written my name 1,000 times on feed slips, tax forms, letters to my wife. I knew the tilt in my R, the way my E bent. This was wrong. Who brought this in? My voice was gravel. She hesitated again, then whispered. "Oscar Hale said you were too frail to handle it yourself. The petition's moving fast, Preston. If no objections filed, the council could approve within weeks." Frailty, that's what they call me now. Frail like oak. Maybe slow, but roots sunk deeper than they guessed. I thanked her with a nod, though thanks felt empty. My boots echoed hard against the courthouse floor as I left. Outside, the sun was brighter than it should have been, mocking me with cheer. I turned the truck toward the church. The steeple's shadow stretched long across the square, covering me as I parked. Inside, the pews smelled of pine polish and candle wax. Pastor wasn't there, but in the corner sat Elias, the old bell ringer, bent as a question mark yet steady as truth. "Press," he said, eyes squinting like he'd been waiting. "You look like a man with a storm on his back." I sat beside him. "The wood creaking. Storm's closer than you think. Tell me, anyone been using the pastor's office after hours?" He scratched his beard, then leaned in. "Funny you ask. Cameras don't lie. Pastor set one up after some vandalism. I seen the footage." From beneath his coat, he pulled a small tablet, cracked at the corner. With a few taps, the screen lit, grainy black and white. There was Oscar, plain as sunrise, slipping into the pastor's study in the dead of night, papers under his arm, looking over his shoulder once before shutting the door. I watched my son on that screen, my own blood, moving like a thief in a holy place. Elias shook his head. "Never thought I'd see a Hale stoop like that. What's he after?" I closed my eyes, the answer carving itself deep. Everything. When I opened them, the bell rope above us swayed again, though no one touched it. A hollow toll rolled through my chest, warning of what was still to come. The ride back from town was longer than it had any right to be. Every fence post along the road looked like a question. Every mile a dare. My son had forged my name inside God's own house, and the law had smiled wide enough to take his word. I parked the truck by the veranda and sat still, hands gripping the wheel. The ranch stretched out in front of me, fields greening after rain, the windmill cutting steady circles, the barn holding its silence like a secret keeper. This land had buried my wife, raised my children, fed my neighbors. Now it was being carved into lots by men who never bent their backs here. I needed strength, and strength meant memory. Inside, the house smelled faintly of cinnamon, the ghost of old mornings. I walked to the mantel and lifted the family Bible again. The slip of paper with her handwriting rested between the pages, soft at the edges but alive. I unfolded it slow, like opening her hand. If they ever try to take it, hide what you must, but never surrender. This land is your cross and your strength. Her words hit harder now than when I'd first read them. She'd known. Maybe not names, not dates, but she had known greed could find its way into family. She had left me a weapon that wasn't steel or rope, but faith. I traced the curve of her letters with my thumb. I could see her in the kitchen again, flour dusting her hair, scolding me for tracking mud on her clean floor, then laughing because she could never stay mad. She looked at me once, years back, after Oscar had blown through his first savings on a failed venture. "Press," she'd said. "The land is the only honest thing you can leave behind." And here I was, watching her prophecy unfold. The Bible fell open where it wanted, somewhere in Exodus. I didn't read the verse. Instead, tucked deeper between brittle pages, I found something else. An old map of the ranch hand-drawn, her notes scribbled in the margins, circles around the oak grove, arrows toward the spring, even a mark at the boundary stones. She'd hidden it here, waiting for me to need it. The paper smelled of dust and her perfume, faint but still clinging. I folded it carefully and slipped it into my jacket. If Oscar thought he had every document, he was wrong. He had forgeries and filings. I had history and blood. From the porch, children's laughter carried, innocent, unknowing. Miles was chasing Uma with a painted egg, Valeria reading aloud to herself. They were the future my wife had meant. Not Oscar, not Whitney, not Nolan. The ones who still believed the field was more than a profit sheet. The sun leaned west. Shadows lengthened, painting the barn darker, sharper. I felt my wife's voice steady inside me. "Don't give it up, President, not to them. Not ever." I closed the Bible, set it firm on the mantel, and spoke into the quiet house. "You've left me the map, darling. Now I'll draw the battle." Outside, the bell at the church rang once, carried on the wind though no service was called. It sounded like judgment on its way. Morning broke sharp and clean, but I carried night inside me. I hitched the truck and drove toward town again, past the fields where dew clung to blades like secrets too heavy to fall. My wife's map rode in my jacket pocket, her words steady in my chest. The church bells had rung the warning. Now I needed proof sharper than faith. I stopped first at the chapel. Pastor met me at the door, kind eyes clouded with unease. "Preston," he said, "Elias showed me the footage. I wish it weren't true." I nodded, words caught in my throat. "The papers Oscar filed. He used your office." Pastor lowered his gaze. "Yes, the cabinet where we keep notarized forms. I found it unlocked. At the time, I thought it was my mistake. Not a mistake. A theft from the altar itself. From there, I walked to the municipal hall. The air inside was stale with bureaucracy. Behind the counter, Miss Talbot stiffened as I approached. "I need to see the filing again," I said. She hesitated, then pulled the folder. The seal stamped across the top glared like a false cross. My name scrawled beneath it, crooked unnatural. "Is it official now?" I asked. She pressed her lips. "The council meets next week. Unless someone contests, the transfer stands." Contests. That word was a knife handle extended to me. "Who notarized this?" I asked. Her eyes flicked down the page. She swallowed. "Signature of Reverend Markham." The pastor. But I knew better. He hadn't signed it. He wouldn't. The signature was a forgery layered on top of another forgery. My son had stolen not only my name, but my pastor's trust. I thanked her and turned. My boots echoed down the hall, a sound like nails driven into wood. Outside, townsfolk bustled with Easter errands. Children clutched baskets. Women arranged flowers. They smiled at me, unaware the land they walked on was under siege. I walked back to the truck slower. Every step weighted with resolve. The war wasn't coming. It was here. When I started the engine, the bell at the church tolled again. Once, twice. The rope pulled by no hand I could see. As I drove past the steeple, Elias stepped out, lifting a hand in grim salute. In his other hand, he held the tablet with the footage, the truth glowing even in daylight. I raised my fingers off the wheel. That footage would be my hammer, and I would strike it where the whole town could hear. The bell's echo hadn't faded from my chest when I pulled the truck into the church lot. Elias was waiting under the steeple, hat low, tablet clutched like contraband. He looked like a man who'd seen too much truth and knew it would cost him. "Press," he said, voice rough. "You ready to see what your own blood's been up to?" I nodded once. Words were too small for the weight. We climbed the narrow stairs into the tower, boards creaking with every step. At the top, the rope dangled thick and frayed, brushing the floor with each swing of the bell above. Elias set the tablet on a wooden crate and tapped the cracked screen. The footage rolled grainy but clear enough. Oscar slipping into the pastor's office under cover of dark. He moved quick, checking over his shoulder, then unrolling documents across the desk. His face was caught in a slant of moonlight, hard and hungry. He forged my name with a pen I recognized, my old fountain pen, the one my wife had given me when we signed the deed together decades back. "Hell," I whispered. Elias glanced at me. He didn't just forge. He desecrated. Using church seal, pastor's name. That's theft from the altar. The words settle heavy. Theft from the altar. A sin not just against blood, but against God. On the screen, Oscar sealed the envelope, slid it into his jacket, and slipped back out. Timestamp. 2 nights before Easter. I watched the loop 3 times. Each pass carved deeper. My son, my boy I'd taught to mend fences, to ride before he could walk, selling me out with the very pen his mother had placed in my hand. "Why show me this, Elias?" I asked finally. He tugged the rope. The bell groaned above us, a hollow warning. "Because lies grow louder when the truth hides. And because your wife once asked me to keep an eye on you, should the day ever come you'd need it." Her name on his lips was a knife and a salve. The tower swayed slightly in the wind. Dust mote spun in the light through the slats. I gripped the railing, steadying myself. My wife had left me words in her Bible, a map of the land. Now here was another relic. Proof caught by a faithful friend who still believed honesty mattered. I looked at Elias. His eyes were tired but certain. "This footage, people will see it." "They will if you want them to," he said. "But you'll need timing. Strike too soon, he'll wriggle free. Strike when they're watching, he won't stand back up." I thought of the parade, the Easter procession where the whole town turned out. Children waving palms, choirs singing, cameras rolling for local news. Yes, timing would be everything. I pocketed the tablet. "Then I'll strike where he can't hide." The bell tolled again, long and low. Its sound rolled down the valley, shaking rafters, rattling glass. Even from here, I could see the ranch in the distance. Fields had held me steady, now threatened by my own son's ambition. "Press." Elias said softly, "What will you do?" I looked at the rope swaying with each echo. "I'll pull it," I said, "and I'll make sure the whole town hears the truth." The bell answered with another toll, louder this time, as if it believed me. The morning of the Easter parade bloomed with brass music and the smell of kettle corn. Main Street overflowed with families, children in pressed clothes clutching pastel baskets. The whole town had gathered, their eyes turned outward to floats, banners, and marching bands. They didn't know they were about to witness something else, a reckoning carried not on wheels, but on words. I stood near the courthouse steps, tablet in my coat, my wife's map pressed flat against my chest. Elias lingered in the crowd, hat pulled low, keeping watch. I had rehearsed the moment 100 times through the night, pacing the veranda like a soldier waiting for dawn. Timing mattered. Truth without an audience is just noise. Truth with witnesses is a hammer. The parade rolled past. School children with paper bonnets, Veterans carrying flags, the pastor waving from a convertible. Behind him, Oscar strode in a tailored jacket, grinning wide, his hand raised as if he were already mayor. Zena floated beside him, soaking up the attention. Nolan marched a step behind, face tight but dutiful. Whitney walked with the choir, her voice sweet enough to mask betrayal. People clapped, unaware. They clapped for thieves and Sunday best. I felt the heat rise in me. My wife's words pulsed, never surrender. When Oscar passed courthouse steps, I stepped forward. My boots hit the pavement hard enough that heads turned. The band faltered, trumpets squealing to a stop. Neighbors. My voice carried sharper than the brass had. I have something to read. Silence rippled outward, curious first, then uneasy. I pulled the folded letter from my pocket, the one my wife had hidden in her Bible. Her handwriting trembled in the sunlight, alive again. This is for my late wife. I said. She wrote, if they ever try to take it, hide what you must, but never surrender. This land is your cross and your strength. A murmur ran through the crowd. Faces tilted toward Oscar, whose smile froze, brittle as glass. And now, I said, raising the tablet, you should see how my son honored that land. I held it high. The screen glowed. Grainy footage played for all to see. Oscar slipping into the pastor's office at night, forging my name. Sealing papers not his to touch. Gasps broke out. Mothers pulled children closer. Men shook their heads. Oscar lunged forward, voice sharp. That's fake. Lies. But the bell from the church tower tolled at that moment, rolling down the street like thunder. Elias had pulled the rope. The sound drowned Oscar's protest. Turned to hollow. The crowd pressed closer, eyes burning into him. Someone shouted, that's your father's name you stole. Another voice, shame. Oscar's face reddened, his jaw set, but his hands trembled. His public mask cracked under the weight of truth. Zena tugged at his sleeve, whispering frantic. Nolan looked away, jaw clenched. Whitney's song had died on her lips. I lowered the tablet, but kept my voice steady. You tried to sell my land behind my back. You forged my name, stole from the altar, and mocked this town's trust. But today you answer to more than me. The people erupted, voices overlapping, condemnation, disbelief, anger. The parade forgotten, their attention fixed on the man who had thought himself untouchable. Oscar stepped back, cornered not by walls but by eyes. For the first time, I saw him shrink, not as a son, not as a man, but as a fraud stripped of ceremony. And I knew this was only the first crack. The real break was still to come. The parade dissolved into whispers and pointing fingers. Oscar tried to recover, smiling too wide, shaking hands that pulled back quicker than they'd reached. I didn't press further. Not yet. A man undone in public doesn't need finishing all at once. You let the silence echo, let it stretch like a crack in dry earth until it swallows him whole. Back at the ranch, the family gathered around the long veranda table again, though the air carried a stiffness it hadn't before. Whitney busied herself with dishes, eyes lowered. Nolan avoided mine altogether, jaw working like he was chewing stone. Zena poured wine no one asked for. Oscar kept up his chatter. A frantic rhythm meant to plaster over the memory of Main Street. The children didn't notice. Valeria was telling Uma about fairies hiding in the orchard. Miles had built a fort of dyed eggshells, proud as an architect. Their innocence was a shield, and I would keep it that way. Grandpa, Uma piped, tugging at my sleeve. Can we do another hunt? Please. Her request caught me off guard. Another hunt. My mind flicked to the small flash drive Elias had given me that morning. The one with audio files he'd pulled from the barn security mic. The voices were clear. Oscar and Nolan discussing demolition, payment schedules, investors. Proof sharper than any blade. I looked at Uma, at her wide eyes. All right, I said, voice steady. One last hunt. The orchard welcomed us back with branches heavy in bloom. I slipped the special egg, plain white plastic, unpainted, but holding the flash drive, into the crook of a root near the porch steps. It was bait, but not for the children. For the truth. They scattered again, laughter chasing through the trees. I stayed on the veranda, watching. It didn't take long. Miles, the quiet one, dug around the roots and shouted, "I found a big one!" He ran back, clutching it high. "Look, Grandpa." Valeria and Uma crowded him, eyes wide at the strange egg. Whitney smiled thin, trying to join their delight, but her glance toward Oscar betrayed her nerves. "Bring it here," I said. They set it on the table. I opened it slow. The flash drive gleamed dull silver against the plastic shell. "What's that?" Uma asked. "A truth," I said. Then I slid it into the small speaker I'd placed near the breadbasket, waiting for this moment. Voices filled the veranda. Oscar's first, confident, cruel. "Tear down the old house first. My father won't stop us. He's too tired to fight." Nolan's followed, oily. "Investors want speed. The ranch will be gone before he knows what happened." The children froze. Whitney's fork clattered. Zena's hand went to her mouth. Oscar lunged to the speaker, but I blocked him with one arm, steady as an oak. "Sit down," I told him. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of decades. The recording played on. Plans for escrow, talk of subdivision, laughter about Easter Ridge Estates. Every word twisted the knife deeper, not in me, but in him. His mask collapsed piece by piece as his children, my grandchildren, stared at him with wide, confused eyes. "Daddy," Valeria whispered. Oscar froze. His lips moved, but no sound came. The speaker clicked off. Silence draped heavy across the table. I looked at Oscar. "Steady. That's your voice. Your plans. In your own words." The man who had stood tall in the parade now shrank before his own children. He opened his mouth to protest, but Uma's small voice cut sharper than mine ever could. "Why would you hurt Grandpa?" The question landed like judgment itself. Oscar dropped his gaze. His wine glass trembled in his hand. And I knew the second public crack had opened. The man was breaking, and there was no mending left. Night fell heavy over the ranch, pressing shadows against the veranda. The children had gone to bed, their questions lingering in the air like smoke after a fire. The adults stayed seated, though no one touched the wine now. The long table felt more like a tribunal than a holiday feast. Oscar hadn't spoken since Uma's question. His face sagged under the weight of it, but his pride refused to break clean. Zena leaned close, whispering frantically, though her eyes darted at me with a mix of fear and fury. Nolan tapped a restless rhythm on the table, the sound of a man calculating exits. Whitney clutched her shawl, her voice silent, her loyalties fraying. I stood, my chair scraping slow. My wife's map lay folded in my jacket, her words carved into my bones. "Never surrender. I'll tell you what happens next," I said. My voice carried quiet but firm, the way thunder warns before it cracks. Every eye turned. "This land will not be sold. Not to investors. Not to your schemes. I've drawn up the papers. Tomorrow I file a trust. The ranch will belong to Valeria, Miles, and Uma when they're grown. Until then, it stays in my hands." The words dropped like stone into water. Ripples of shock moved around the table. "What?" Oscar snapped, finally finding his voice. "You can't." "I can." I cut him off, steady as a fence post. "And I will." Zena's veneer cracked, sharp words spilling. "You skip your own children? Give it straight to the brats." "They're not brats," I said, calm as winter. "They're the only ones here who still see this land as more than numbers. They know it as home." Nolan pushed back his chair. "You'll regret this, Preston. Contracts have power. Money has power." I met his stare. "Not against roots this deep." Whitney's voice broke, soft but shaking. "Daddy, please. There has to be another way." "There was," I said, meeting her eyes. "It was honesty, but you chose silence." Oscar slammed his fist on the table, rattling dishes. "You think you've won? You think this ends with a piece of paper?" I leaned forward, close enough for him to see every line the years had carved into me. "No, son. This ends with me still standing, and you stripped of everything you tried to steal." For a moment, we stayed locked, Father and son, the air between us stretched like wire ready to snap. Then I straightened, my voice final. Tomorrow the trust is sealed. Easter Ridge will never rise here. This ranch will outlast us both. Oscar's face twisted, a storm of rage and disbelief. He opened his mouth to answer, but from the dark of the yard came a crash, sharp and splintering, the sound of wood tearing. The barn. I turned toward it, heart pounding. Whatever they hadn't taken in daylight, they were coming for under night's cover. The war hadn't waited for morning. It was here, and it was kicking down my door. The sound tore through the night, with splintering, iron groaning. Every bone in me recognized it. That barn had stood through storms, through hailstones the size of fists, through lightning strikes that scarred its roof. It didn't break easy. Whoever was out there had come with intent. I grabbed a lantern off the wall, its glass rattling as I moved across the veranda. "Stay here," I ordered, though I didn't bother looking back to see if they'd listen. The ground beneath my boots hummed with adrenaline as I crossed the yard. The night smelled of hay and iron, thick with tension. The barn door hung open, one hinge twisted loose. Inside, lantern light flickered where no lantern should be. Shadows bent wrong against the walls. I stepped through, jaw tight, and there he was, Oscar, standing among the stalls, breath ragged, hammer in one hand, splinters clinging to his jacket. Nolan hovered near the tool chest, his face pale but determined. Between them lay crates dragged open, straw spilling out like entrails. "What are you doing?" My voice carried cold. Oscar spun, eyes wild, looking for what you're hiding. The hammer trembled in his grip. He looked less like a man and more like a cornered animal, desperate and unthinking. "There's nothing here for you," I said, holding the lantern higher. Its light caught the sweat on his brow, the twitch in Nolan's jaw. "You think we don't know?" Nolan snapped. "The map, the papers. You got something stashed." I thought of my wife's careful handwriting. The map folded safe in my jacket. They were sniffing after ghosts they could never hold. Oscar stepped forward, the hammer rising. "You humiliated me today, in front of everyone. You think I'll let you take everything from me?" I didn't flinch. I didn't take anything. "You tried to steal. There's a difference." The barn air thickened. Horses shifted in their stalls, uneasy. The rope pulley creaked above, echoing the bell tower in town, as if judgment followed us everywhere now. I set the lantern on a beam, freeing my hands. "You're my son," I said, steady. "But tonight you've crossed a line. Swing that hammer, and you'll never step back." For a heartbeat, his eyes met mine. Behind the fury, I saw something small, something almost childlike, a boy once proud to ride beside me across these fields. But greed drowned it fast. He snarled, "Then I'll burn it all down." Before I could move, Nolan grabbed his arm. "Oscar, stop." His voice cracked under pressure. "You'll ruin everything." The hammer clattered to the dirt, ringing like a broken bell. Silence crashed down, heavier than noise. I stepped forward, slow but firm, picked up the hammer, held it between us. "This land won't burn. Not while I'm breathing." Oscar's chest heaved, eyes darting, searching for footing he no longer had. Nolan backed away, muttering curses that sounded more like prayers. I leaned close enough for Oscar to hear the truth in my whisper. "Every lie you built is crumbling, and tomorrow when the council meets, I'll make sure the rubble is all you have left." His face twisted, but no words came. He looked like a man watching the gallows being built, and knowing it bore his measure. I turned, carrying the hammer with me, leaving the barn wide open so the night could see what had been attempted there. The lantern's flame licked high, as if feeding on the truth. From the porch, I saw the children's faces pressed against the window, eyes wide. Behind them, Whitney's shadow hovered uncertain. Xena pale with fury, Nolan slinking back into the dark, and Oscar, still standing in the barn's doorway, looked smaller than he ever had. The fight wasn't finished, but the ground had shifted and he knew it. Dawn came gray and unforgiving. I brewed coffee strong enough to wake a mule, and laid my wife's map on the kitchen table beside the blue pie dish. The hammer from the barn rested there too, a crude paperweight over better intentions. I ran a finger along the map's inked lines, orchard, spring, boundary stones, then folded it and slipped it into my jacket. Strategy before sentiment. That's how you keep fences standing. By 9, I was in town at Delgado and Sons. Martha Delgado had drafted wills and cattle contracts for folks here since before Oscar could spell mortgage. She peered over her glasses at my face, took an aware of the night, and didn't waste a second. "You're putting the ranch in a trust," she said more than asked. "Irrevocable," I answered. "Direct to the grandkids at 25. Until then, I'm trustee." She tapped keys, printer humming like a hive. "We'll need parcel descriptions and deed references." "I brought history," I said, handing her my wife's map, "and I can fetch certified copies from records." The copies Oscar Planet won't do. Martha's mouth tightened at his name. "We notarize here. You sign. I file courier to the clerk before lunch." I nodded. "Make it read plain as scripture. No loopholes." While she drafted, I stepped a window. Across the street, the church bell rope hung still in the tower slit, a rough line against bright sky. I thought of Elias's tablet, the footage, the pen my wife had given me scribbling a lie in my son's hand. Anger rose, slow and controlled, like a bull breath before the charge. The documents came warm from the printer. Martha slid them over. "This will hold." She pointed at the trustee clause. "You, until you're not." Her eyes softened. "Preston, are you sure?" "I'm sure," I said. They were going to pave my wife's laughter. We signed. Her stamp thumped like a heartbeat. "Now go get those certified descriptions." The courthouse air had the same dust and ink, but the clerk's desk felt different, charged, like a storm sits on the roof. Miss Talbot looked up, worry already in her eyes. "They moved it," she blurted before I could speak. "The council. Special session tonight. Investor representative petition, a window of opportunity. They added your parcels to the agenda. Tonight?" My voice came out flat. 7. She lowered her voice. "Oscar was here at 8. He looked desperate." "Good," I said. Desperate men make sloppy mistakes. I slid her the request. "I need certified legal descriptions swiftly." She hustled, stamped, signed. "I'll be at the session," she said, eyes hardening. "We all will." On my way out, I stopped at the church. Elias stood at the base of the tower, as if he'd grown there. "You'll need more than paper," he said, handing me the tablet again. "You'll need a bell." "I'll have one," I said. "Come at 7. Back at Delgado's, Martha scanned the certified pages into the trust packet, sealed it, slid it into a thick envelope like a blade into a scabbard. "Clerk's drop closes at 5, she said. "After that, council theater begins." She looked at me, chin lifted. "You're ready for a stage press?" I brought the script. I answered, tapping the envelope, then the tablet in my pocket. And I know my lines. At 4:58, we hit the clerk's window. Stamp. Received. Irrevocable. The word tasted clean. I didn't go home. I drove straight to the municipal hall. By 6:45, the chamber was packed. Townsfolk shoulder to shoulder, church ladies in Easter hats, ranch hands scrubbed and solemn. A poster board leaned against the dais with glossy renderings. Cul-de-sacs curling over my pastures. Easter Ridge Estates in cheerful font like a joke that thinks it's welcome. At the front, Oscar hovered with the investor man, both of them polished to a sheen that looked slippery under the lights. Zena sat in the row behind, spine straight, eyes like knives. Nolan flipped through a binder. Whitney held the kids near the back, as if distance could spare them for what their father had become. The mayor banged the gavel. Special session is now in order. The investor stepped to the mic, smile sharp. "Ladies and gentlemen, opportunity is knocked. With your approval tonight, we begin transforming idle acreage into..." The double doors at the rear swung open on their own draft. I walked in, hat in my hand, envelope under my arm, and every head turned like wheat in a sudden wind. I didn't stop at a seat. I walked straight to the podium, set my envelope on it, and faced my son. "Before you vote," I said, voice steady as a post in clay, You're going to hear what he did in God's house. And I raised the tablet as the gavel lifted to silence me. The council chamber hushed so fast it felt like someone had cut the air. I stood at the podium, tablet glowing in my hand, its cracked screen holding more truth than all the glossy posters on the wall. 2 nights before Easter, I said, steady, my son entered the pastor's office without permission. He used my fountain pen, my wife's gift, to forge my name. He stole from the altar and filed papers that were never his to sign. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The mayor raised his gavel, but I lifted the tablet higher. Don't silence me, Mayor. Silence him. With one tap, the footage rolled. The grainy video filled the monitors on either side of the dais. Oscar slipping into the office, laying out papers, writing in haste, sealing the envelope, his face clear as day. Gasps cut through the chamber. Someone whispered, "That's the Hale boy." Another. In the pastor's study, Oscar shot to his feet. "It's doctored," he shouted, voice breaking. "You think I'd risk everything for?" "Risk?" I cut him off. "You already did. With my name, with my land, with this town's trust." The bell in the church tower tolled, faint but clear through the open windows. Elias had kept his promise. The sound rolled into the chamber like judgment itself, drowning Oscar's sputtering denials. The mayor looked rattled, his gavel lowered. Council members whispered fiercely among themselves. The investor man's face turned gray, his polished smile gone stiff. I leaned into the mic, voice slow and sharp. "That petition you hold? Worthless. This afternoon I filed a trust. The Hale Ranch is bound to my grandchildren. Irrevocable. Untouchable. The land is no longer his to sell, no longer mine to lose." The clerk from records, Miss Talbot, rose from the back, envelope in hand. Filed, stamped, sealed. "I witness it myself," she said, her voice carrying clean across the hall. A wave of noise swept the crowd. Applause, shouts, disbelief. Oscar staggered, pale, eyes darting like a trapped coyote. "You can't do this," he bellowed. "You can't cut me out." I fixed him with a stare that had once stopped him cold, as a boy sneaking whiskey from my cabinet. "I didn't cut you out, son. You did. Every lie, every forgery, every betrayal. You swung the axe." The investor grabbed his briefcase, muttering something about breach of confidence, and pushed past him. Nolan sank into his chair, face hollow. Zena hissed curses under her breath, sharp as broken glass. Oscar, stripped of allies, turned to crowd. He's an old man, frail, confused. You can't let him. But then Uma's voice rang out from the back, clear and unshaken. "He's stronger than you, Daddy." The chamber stilled again. Every eye swung back to me. I placed the tablet on the podium. Its screen gone dark now, but its truth burned into everyone present. "Vote if you want," I said, low but final. "But know this. The ranch is beyond your reach. And so is my name." The mayor's hand shook as he set down the gavel. Council members exchanged looks heavy with resignation. One by one, they lowered their papers. The vote never came. And Oscar, my son, my blood, stood alone in the center of the chamber, red-faced, jaw trembling, the crowd's condemnation pressing down like a weight he couldn't throw off. It was his second public humiliation, and still the final blow waited. The council chamber emptied slow, like a storm breaking. People whispered in clusters, glancing back at Oscar with eyes full of pity and scorn. He stood rigid in the aisle, fists clenched, face pale and blotched with fury. The investor had already vanished. Nolan sulked near the exit, and Zena snapped her purse shut like it was a weapon she couldn't quite wield. Whitney herded the kids close, but Uma kept staring at me as if she'd already understood everything. I didn't wait for Oscar to speak. I walked past him, the envelope of the trust under my arm, Elias's tablet heavy in my coat. Every step down the chamber aisle was another nail sealing his schemes shut. Outside, the night was alive with murmurs. Townsfolk gathered under lamplight, their Easter ribbons drooping in the cool air. When they saw me, applause rose, not loud, not festive, but steady, like respect being hammered into place. Oscar followed out a moment later, red-eyed and shaking, but the applause didn't belong to him. No hand lifted for his name. He tried to shout over them. He's lying. He's sick. But his voice cracked, brittle against the tide. Elias met me on the courthouse steps, hand gripping the bell rope he'd carried from the tower, cut clean at one end. "Thought you want a piece of it," he said. I took it, the coarse hemp scratching my palm, heavy with the echo of every toll it had rung. I lifted it high for the crowd. This rope has called us to worship, to weddings, to funerals. Tonight it called us to truth. The people cheered louder this time. Faces glowed with something brighter than anger. Relief, maybe, that a lie had been dragged into daylight. Oscar froze on the steps, pinned by their eyes. He tried to sneer, to brush it off, but no mask could hide the sweat on his brow. "3 times you tried to bury me," I said, turning to him so the whole street heard. "First with your false toast, then with your secret meeting, and finally with your theft from the altar. Each time, the land itself rose against you." I held the rope out toward him. "You wanted power, Oscar? Take it. Pull the bell again, and let the whole town hear your shame." He didn't move. His lips pressed in, jaw tight. Around us, the crowd silence grew sharp, waiting. Uma's voice carried from Whitney's arms. "Grandpa's stronger." That broke him. His shoulders sagged. Fists unclenched, and he turned away, pushing to the crowd that parted not in respect but in disgust. Whispers followed him down the street, like stones thrown at his back. I lowered the rope, coiling it in my hand. My wife's words pulsed in my mind. Never surrender. The trust papers were filed, the town knew the truth, but one thing remained: justice inside the family itself. Tomorrow I would deliver it, not in whispers, not in chambers, but at the very table where it had all begun. The veranda would see the last judgment, and Oscar would finally understand what it meant to lose everything. Easter morning rose clean, the sky brushed with pink like it had been painted by a softer hand. But the house was heavy, weighed down by what had cracked open in town the night before. The veranda table still stood where it always had, long boards set with chipped china, my wife's blue pie dish in the center, but no one sat easily around it now. The children fidgeted, sensing tension they couldn't name. Valeria traced patterns on the table with her finger. Uma clutched a painted egg like a talisman, and Miles stared at the ground as if answers were buried there. Whitney tried to coax smiles, but her voice wavered. Nolan sulked at the edge of the porch, arms crossed, while Zena arranged silverware with tight, angry precision. And Oscar, he sat across from me, jaw set, eyes refusing to meet mine. I laid the coil of bell rope on the table. Its rough hemp sprawled across the boards like a question no one wanted to answer. "This rope," I said, voice carrying steady, "rang every Easter service your mother ever sang in. It rang the morning she passed. And last night, it rang for the truth." Silence held. The children's eyes darted from a rope to their father. Oscar's nostrils flared. "Are you finished humiliating me, old man?" "No," I said simply, "not until you hear it all." I pulled out my wife's map, unfolded it slow, the paper soft and worn. Her handwriting bloomed across the margins, notes about the oak grove, the spring, the boundary stones. I set it down so the children could see. "Your grandmother drew this. I told them. She wanted the land remembered not for profit, but for its stories, for the orchard where you hunted eggs, the fields where calves first stood. She knew this ranch was more than dirt. She knew it was our strength." Valeria reached out, brushing the edge of the map, like it might whisper to her. I looked back at Oscar. "You tried to turn her laughter into cul-de-sacs. You tried to turn this map into a sales brochure. And when that wasn't enough, you forged my name to bury me." His fists clenched on the table. "You think the town's applause changes anything? You think filing papers makes you the winner?" "I don't need applause," I said, "and I don't need to win. I need only to keep what was entrusted to me. And last night, I did. The trust is sealed. The ranch belongs to your children when they are grown. Not you, never you." The words cracked across the veranda like a whip. The children stared wide-eyed. Zena hissed through her teeth. Nolan muttered a curse. Whitney put her hand over Uma's, steadying her. Oscar stood, knocking his chair back. "You will regret this," he shouted, voice breaking. You'll die alone on this dirt, and no one will remember you. I rose too, slow and certain. I already have what you'll never hold. Oscar. Respect. And when I'm gone, this land will still speak my name. Through your children, not through you. The bell rope lay between us. I pushed it toward him. You wanted power? Pull it. Let the whole valley hear you one last time. His face twisted, torn between rage and shame. His hand hovered over the rope, trembling, then pulled back. He turned, storming off the porch, the slam of his boots loud but hollow. The children watched him go. Uma whispered. He left. Yes, I said softly, sitting again. And when a man leaves truth behind, he leaves everything. But even as I spoke, I knew the final reckoning wasn't done. The land had heard his threat, and it demanded one more answer. The sun dipped low, washing the ranch in copper light. Easter had ended, but its weight still pressed on every board of the veranda. I sat in my wife's old chair, the coil of bell rope at my side, her map folded neatly in my pocket, and the hammer from the barn resting on the rail. Symbols of what we built, what we fought for, what I refused to surrender. Oscar came back at dusk. He always did, anger pulling him like gravity. He stormed up the path, jacket torn, eyes wild. Behind him the dust swirled, but no family followed. Zena had gone. Nolan had slunk off. Whitney stayed inside with the children. He was alone now, and he knew it. You think you've beaten me? He shouted. His voice cracked against the open sky. You made a fool of me in town, turned my kids against me, cut me out like I was nothing. I stood slow, steady as the windmill behind me. You cut yourself out, Oscar, with every lie, every forged line, every plan to bury what your mother and I built. He stepped onto the porch, close enough for me to smell the sour whiskey on his breath. His hand twitched at his side, like it still remembered the hammer he'd dropped in the barn. You're an old man, he hissed. The land should have been mine. I earned it. I raised a rope between us. You earned nothing. You tried to steal everything. And tonight, the only thing left to you is this, shame loud enough to carry. I threw the rope at his feet. The crowd had gathered again along the fence line. Neighbors, townsfolk who'd come after the council session to see how this ended. Their murmurs stilled. Pick it up, I told him. Wring your own disgrace. Or walk away and know the sound will haunt you anyway. He looked at the rope, then at me, then at the people beyond the fence. For the first time, I saw fear swallow his fury. His hand shook. He bent, grabbed the rope, and froze. The children's faces glowed in the window behind me. Uma's small voice carried out, "Don't, Daddy." Oscar dropped the rope. It hit the porch with a hollow thud. The silence that followed was louder than any bell. I leaned close, voice low, but meant for all to hear. You wanted everything. Now you have nothing. No land, no trust, no respect, not even the sound of your own name, without shame tied to it. His mouth opened, but no words came. He looked once at the rope, once at me, and then stumbled back down the steps, past the fence line, past the watching eyes. He didn't look back. The crowd parted, not with anger this time, but with a quiet finality. They knew exile when they saw it. I turned, lifted one of the painted eggs from the table, green and bruised looking, the one I'd stamped with my brand. I held it up in the dying light. To the future, I said softly, looking at the children through the glass, to what endures. I set the egg on the rail, beside the hammer and the rope, 3 relics of a battle won. The sun slid behind the fields, painting the land in blood and gold. I sat back in the chair, breath steady, the map warm against my chest. You wanted it all, Oscar, I whispered into quiet. But now you have nothing. No land, no name, no father. The wind shifted to the orchard, carrying children's laughter faint but bright. And for the first time in years, the ranch felt safe again. The final toll had been struck, and I was still standing. If you like this story, please like this video. Subscribe to the channel and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the right.